Captain Zarathek's forearms trembled as she watched her bridge crew collapse one by one. The pale blue liquid pooling beneath Lieutenant Crintal told her everything she needed to know. The poison was working faster than their medical bay could. Counteract it, Captain, wheezed Communications Officer Velnix, her breathing apparatus crackling with static. The humans, they responded to our distress call. Zarathek's compound eyes widened. Humans. The species from the legendary Deathworld Terra. She had heard whispers in the outer colonies, stories that seemed too wild to believe. A species that had evolved on a planet so hostile that other races used it as a reference point for impossibility. What did they say? Zarathek asked, struggling to keep her voice steady as another wave of nausea hit her. The Kethraxi battle cruiser, Swift Judgment, had been pursuing them for 3 cycles now. Their experimental bioweapon was slowly killing everyone aboard the civilian transport Gentle Current. Velnix's translator crackled as she fought to stay conscious. They said, "Message received. Do not engage hostiles. Assistance en route. That's all, Captain." Through the viewport, Zarathek could see the sleek, predatory shape of the Kethraxi cruiser gaining on them. The Swift Judgment was 3 times their size, armed with plasma cannons that could vaporize their little transport in seconds. The only reason they were still alive was because the Kethraxi wanted them alive, wanted to test their new weapon on different species. "How long? Until the humans arrive?" she asked, though she already knew the answer would not be good. "Unknown, Captain, they didn't specify." Velnix coughed and more blue liquid splattered across her console. "But the Kethraxi will be in firing range in 6 minutes. Zarathek closed her eyes. She had 847 civilians aboard, families fleeing, the war zone, children who had never seen combat, elders who had survived 3 previous conflicts only to face this new horror. The bioweapon was designed to be slow-acting, giving the Kethraxi time to study its effects. Her people were dying by degrees and she was powerless to stop it. "Captain!" Navigator Hesserin called out, his voice sharp with fear. "Something's happening." On the long-range sensors, space itself seemed to be tearing. Reality warped and twisted as something massive began to emerge from what looked like a wound in the fabric of space-time. The energy readings were off the charts. "What in the name of the first light is that?" Zarathek whispered. The thing that emerged from the impossible rift defied easy description. It was not a ship in any conventional sense. It was angular, brutal, covered in what looked like armor plating that had been welded over older armor plating. Weapon ports dotted its surface like the eyes of a spider. But most unsettling of all were the markings, symbols that seemed to move and shift when you looked at them directly. "Captain," Velnix said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I'm receiving a transmission from that thing." "Put it through." The voice that filled the bridge was unlike anything Zarathek had ever heard. It was low, gravelly, and carried an undertone that made her survival instincts scream danger. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Terran vessel. Inevitable consequences. We received your distress call. Are you the Scifi transport Gentle Current?" Yes," Zarathek stammered. "This is Captain Zarathek. We have 847 civilians aboard, and we're under attack by a Kethraxi battle cruiser. They've deployed some kind of bioweapon. My people are dying." There was a pause. When the human spoke again, her voice was colder than the void between stars. "Understood. We've scanned your attackers. Kethraxi battlecruiser, Swift Judgment. They're using illegal bioweapons against civilian targets." Another pause. "Captain Zarathek, I need you to do exactly as I say. Take your ship and move to these coordinates immediately." A set of navigation data appeared on their screens. The coordinates would take them directly toward the Kethraxi ship. "But that will put us in their direct line of fire," Zarathek protested. "Trust me," the human said, and something in her voice made Zarathek's blood run cold. "They won't be firing on anyone much longer." On the sensor display, the inevitable consequences began to move. It didn't accelerate like a normal ship. It simply appeared to decide that it was going to be somewhere else, and then it was. The laws of physics seemed to politely step aside to accommodate it. Captain Zarathek, came another transmission, this one from the Cathraxi cruiser. You will surrender immediately or we will destroy you. You have 30 seconds to comply. Before Zarathek could respond, Captain Chen's voice cut across all frequencies. Cathraxi vessel Swift Judgment. This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Fleet. You are in violation of 17 different interstellar warfare conventions, including the use of biological weapons against civilian targets. You will stand down immediately and prepare to be boarded. The response from the Cathraxi was immediate and predictable. Laughter. High-pitched, chittering laughter that made Zarathek's skin crawl. Human. The Cathraxi commander's voice was filled with contempt. You are one ship against our battle. Cruiser. We have heard the stories about your species, but they are just that. Stories. Surrender now, and we will make your death quick. Captain Chen's response was delivered in the same flat, professional tone she might use to discuss the weather. Negative. You have harmed civilians under our protection. This constitutes an act of war against humanity. You have 10 seconds to surrender. The Cathraxi commander's laughter grew louder. Impossible, we will... The transmission cut off. On Zarathek's sensors, the Swift Judgment simply stopped. Not destroyed, not damaged, just stopped. As if every system aboard had simultaneously decided to take a nap. What did you do? Zarathek whispered. Nothing permanent, Captain Chen replied. Yet, Captain Zarathek, we're beaming over medical supplies and a detox agent for the bioweapon. My chief medical officer will coordinate with your medical staff. How did you... Captain, Chen interrupted. There are some conversations best had face to face. Permission to come aboard? Zarathek looked around her bridge. Half her crew was unconscious, the other half barely functioning. Whatever the humans had done to neutralize the Cathraxi threat so easily suggested they possessed technology far beyond anything she had imagined. Permission granted, she said finally. What materialized in her bridge a moment later was not what Zarathek expected. Captain Sarah Chen was tall for a human but not imposing. She looked ordinary. Brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, dark eyes that seemed to take in everything at once, wearing what appeared to be a simple gray uniform with no obvious armor or weapons. But when those dark eyes met Zarathek's, the Scifi captain felt something she had never experienced before. The absolute certainty that she was in the presence of a predator so far above her in the food chain that the comparison was almost meaningless. Captain Zarathek, Chen said, extending her hand in what Zarathek recognized as a human greeting gesture. I'm sorry we couldn't get here sooner. Zarathek reached out with one of her forearms to clasp the offered hand. The human's grip was firm but gentle, the touch of someone who knew exactly how much force they were applying. I don't understand, Zarathek said. How did you disable their ship so quickly? Chen smiled, and it was not a comforting expression. We didn't disable it, Captain. We convinced it to disable itself. Turns out, when you introduce a Terran AI virus into a Cathraxi computer system, the organic components of their technology develop what you might call trust issues. AI virus? Zarathek's translator struggled with the concept. It's complicated, Chen said. The important thing is that your people are safe. My medical team is already treating the bioweapon exposure. Everyone will make a full recovery. Thank you. But I have to ask, why? Why would humans respond to our distress call? We've never had contact before. Your species has a reputation for isolationism. Chen's expression grew serious. Captain, may I speak plainly? Of course. Humanity has a very simple rule when it comes to interstellar politics. We don't start fights, but we absolutely finish them. Chen gestured toward the viewport where the Swift Judgment hung motionless in space. Using bioweapons against civilians crosses a line that we don't allow anyone to cross. Ever. What happens now? Zarathek asked. Now? Now we have a conversation with the Cathraxi about the rules of civilized warfare. Don't worry, they'll survive the experience. Mostly. As if summoned by her words, the Swift Judgment suddenly flared to life again. but instead of resuming its attack, it began broadcasting on all frequencies. "This is Commander Vexthol of the Kethraxi battlecruiser, Swift Judgment." The voice was shaky, terrified. We surrender. Unconditionally. Please, we surrender." Chen nodded, as if this was exactly what she had expected. "Captain Zarathek, I'm going to need you and your people to file a full report about this incident with the Galactic Council. Make sure they understand exactly what the Kethraxi were doing out here. What about you? We're going to escort the Swift Judgment back to Kethraxi space and have a little chat with their government about their bioweapons program." Chen's smile returned, and this time it was genuinely terrifying. "It's going to be a very educational conversation." As Captain Chen prepared to leave, Zarathek found herself asking the question that had been burning in her mind since the human ship appeared. "Captain, can I ask you something personal?" "Shoot. The stories we hear about humans, about Terra being a death world, are they true?" Chen paused at the edge of the transport beam. "Captain, Terra isn't just a death world. Terra is the death world. Every other dangerous planet in the galaxy is measured against Terra, and none of them come close." She tilted her head slightly. "But here's the thing people don't understand. About Deathworlders, we don't survive because we're strong. We survive because we protect each other. And when someone threatens innocence under our protection..." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. As the transport beam carried Captain Chen away, Zarathek felt a chill run down her spine. Not from fear, but from the sudden understanding that humanity's reputation for isolationism wasn't about indifference. It was about mercy. Chapter 2. The Council of Whispers. 3 days after the incident with the Swift Judgment, Zarathek found herself standing before the Galactic Council on the neutral station of Haven's Rest. The circular chambers were filled with representatives from 47 different species, all of them listening intently as she recounted the events. "And you're telling us," said Counselor Threndak, his insectoid features twitching with skepticism, "that a single human vessel neutralized a Kethraxi battlecruiser without firing a shot?" "That's correct, Counselor." "Impossible," scoffed Ambassador Irlhex from her floating biopod. "The Kethraxi have the most advanced military technology in this sector. Their ships are biological constructs, living entities that can adapt and evolve in real time. No conventional weapon could simply turn off such a vessel." Zarathek glanced at the datapad in her hands. The official report was 17 pages long, but she knew the Council was more interested in the implications than the technical details. "With respect, Ambassador, I don't think the humans used conventional weapons. The energy signatures we recorded were unlike anything in our databases, and the speed at which they responded to our distress call." "How long between your SOS transmission and their arrival?" asked Counselor Printal, the elderly Nexari leaning forward with interest. 14 minutes, a murmur ran through the chamber. "Even with the fastest FTL drives known to galactic civilization, it would take hours to cross the distance the humans had covered." "That's impossible," Irlhex repeated, "unless they were already in the area." "I asked Captain Chen about that," Zarathek said. "She told me they were patrolling the outer reaches when they received our signal. That puts them at least 6 hours away at maximum FTL." The murmur became a buzz of concerned conversation. The implications were staggering. If humans possessed FTL technology that advanced, it would completely reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. "Captain Zarathek," came a new voice, and the chamber fell silent. The speaker was Counselor Mechthuven, the eldest member of the Council and representative of the first ones, the ancient species that had discovered faster than light travel and founded galactic civilization. "Yes, Counselor?" "Did the human captain give any indication of how many ships like the inevitable consequences humanity possesses?" Zarathek hesitated. This was the question she had been dreading. She referred to it as being part of the Terran Defense Fleet. She made it sound like there were others. "How many others?" "I don't know, Counselor. But when I asked about humanity's isolationist policies, she said something interesting. She said humanity doesn't start fights, but they finish them. She made it sound like they've been preparing for something. Counselor Mechthuven's ancient features grew thoughtful. Preparing for what? Before Zarathek could answer, the chamber's main display screen flickered to life. The image that appeared made several council members gasp in alarm. It showed the Kethraxi homeworld of Vexthul, or rather it showed the space around Vexthul. The planet itself was obscured by what looked like a small moon, but as the image focused, it became clear that the moon was artificial. It was a ship. A human ship the size of a small planetoid, hanging in orbit above the Kethraxi capital world like a sword of Damocles. This transmission was received an hour ago, announced the chamber's AI. Origin Kethraxi High Command. The image shifted to show the interior of what was clearly a Kethraxi government chamber. The beings visible were the most powerful leaders of one of the galaxy's most militaristic species, and they all looked terrified. Esteemed members of the Galactic Council, the lead Kethraxi spoke in careful, measured tones. We hereby formally request mediation in our current diplomatic situation with the human species. The transmission cut to an external shot of the massive human vessel. As the camera watched, sections of its hull began to unfold like the petals of some enormous metal flower. What was revealed beneath made Zarathek's blood run cold. Weapons. Weapons on a scale that defied comprehension. Each gun barrel was large enough to fly a ship through, and there were hundreds of them. The humans have informed us, the Kethraxi continued, that our bioweapons research program violates something they call basic sentient rights. They have requested that we discontinue all such research immediately and turn over all existing samples for destruction. Another Kethraxi leaned into the frame. We have attempted to negotiate, but the humans were quite clear that this was not a negotiation. They have given us 72 hours to comply with their demands, or they will, how did they put it, demonstrate the consequences of harming innocents. The transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in stunned silence. 72 hours, Counselor Threndak whispered. They gave the Kethraxi 72 hours to dismantle their entire military research program. Or what? Ambassador Errol Hex demanded. They'll destroy the planet? That would be genocide on a scale unseen since the Dark Age. I don't think they intend genocide, Zarathek said quietly. Captain Chen seemed very careful to specify that the Kethraxi would survive their conversation. I think they intend something worse than destruction. What could be worse than destruction? Zarathek looked around the chamber at the assembled representatives of galactic civilization. Irrelevance. Before anyone could respond to that ominous statement, another transmission began. This one carried the insignia of the Terran Defense Fleet. The face that appeared on the screen was human, but not Captain Chen. This was an older man with silver hair and eyes that seemed to hold the weight of worlds. Esteemed members of the Galactic Council, he said, his voice carrying the authority of absolute command. I am Admiral Marcus Rivera, Supreme Commander of the Terran Defense Fleet. I'm transmitting from the Terra's Hammer, currently in orbit. Above Vexthul. He paused, letting that sink in. The Terra's Hammer. The ship they had just seen was apparently large enough to have a name that included the word Terra. We are not here to threaten anyone, Admiral Rivera continued. We are here to make something very clear. For the past 200 years, humanity has watched the galaxy tear itself apart, with conflicts that achieve nothing but suffering for innocent beings. We have remained isolated not out of indifference, but because we hoped you would eventually learn to police yourselves. His expression grew grim. Recent events have made it clear that this hope was misplaced. The use of biological weapons against civilian populations is not a political statement. It is an act of evil. And humanity has a very simple policy regarding evil. The Admiral's image was replaced by a star chart showing the galaxy. Dozens of systems were highlighted in red. These are the locations where we have detected active bioweapons research programs. As of today, all of these programs are being shut down, not negotiated away, not bargained over. Shut down. The red markers began disappearing from the map, one by one. For those civilizations wise enough to comply voluntarily, we offer our gratitude and our friendship. For those who choose to resist, the Admiral's voice grew cold. We offer the example of the Kethraxi. The transmission cut to a view of space near Vexthul. The massive human ship was moving, not toward the planet, but away from it. As it did, something extraordinary happened. The ship began to multiply. "Mother of the first light," whispered Counselor Printal. "It's not one ship, it's a fleet." What they had taken for a single massive vessel was revealed to be dozens of smaller ships locked together in formation. As they watched, the fleet spread out across the system like a net of predators. 47 vessels, came Admiral Rivera's voice over the images. Each one crewed by volunteers from Terra's military academies. Each one equipped with weapons and defenses that represent the pinnacle of human engineering. Each one capable of sterilizing a planet or defending it, depending on the choices made by its inhabitants. The transmission shifted back to Admiral Rivera's face. "I want to be very clear about something. Humanity does not seek to rule the galaxy. We have no interest in your politics, your trade disputes, or your territorial squabbles. We want only one thing, the guarantee that innocent beings will be protected from the horrors of biological warfare." He leaned forward slightly, and his eyes seemed to look directly at each member of the council. "This is not a request. This is not a negotiation. This is us informing you of the new reality. Any civilization that uses biological weapons against civilian populations will answer to humanity. Any government that allows such research will be held accountable. Any military force that threatens innocents under our protection will learn why Terra is called a death world." The transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in absolute silence. Finally, Counselor Mechthuven spoke. "Captain Zarathek, in your opinion, are the humans bluffing?" Zarathek thought back to her encounter with Captain Chen. The calm professionalism, the casual way she had neutralized a battlecruiser, the certainty in her voice when she spoke about protecting innocents. "No, Counselor. I don't think they're bluffing at all." "Then," said the ancient being, "it appears we have a new player in galactic politics." "Not a player," Zarathek corrected, "a referee." As if summoned by her words, every communication device in the chamber began broadcasting the same message simultaneously. "This is the Terran Defense Fleet, all biological. Weapons research has been terminated in the Vexthul system. We are moving to our next objective. Any civilization wishing to avoid complications should review their military research programs immediately. Humanity thanks you for your cooperation." In the silence that followed, Ambassador Errol Hex asked the question that was on everyone's mind. What happens if they decide we're not cooperating fast enough? No one answered. No one had an answer. But across the galaxy, in laboratories and research facilities on dozens of worlds, scientists and military officials were frantically shutting down projects that had been decades in the making. Because they had all learned the same lesson that day. When Deathworlders decide something is unacceptable, it becomes unacceptable. The age of biological warfare had ended not with treaties or negotiations, but with a simple declaration from the most dangerous species in the galaxy, and everyone knew that this was just the beginning. Chapter 3. The Price of Peace 2. Weeks after what historians would later call the Terran Ultimatum, Captain Zarathek found herself aboard the human vessel, Inevitable Consequences, once again. But this time she wasn't dying from bioweapon exposure. She was there as an observer. "Are you sure about this, Captain?" she asked Sarah Chen as they stood on the bridge watching the approach to the hegemony system. "About bringing you along, or about what we're going to do when we get there?" "Both," Chen smiled grimly. "You're here because someone needs to witness what happens when a civilization chooses not to cooperate. As for what we're going to do," she gestured at the main view screen, where the industrial world of Korthak Prime was growing larger. "We're going to give them exactly what they asked for." The hegemony had been the most defiant response to humanity's ultimatum. Rather than shut down their bioweapons program, They had accelerated it. Intelligence reports suggested they were working on something called species-specific pathogens, diseases designed to target specific genetic markers. "Captain Chen," came a voice from the communications station. "We're receiving a transmission from Hegemony Fleet Command." "Put it through." The face that appeared on screen belonged to Admiral Kexvar, the military leader of the Hegemony forces. His species, the Hegemites, were known for their aggressive militarism and their belief that might made right. "Human vessel." Admiral Kexvar's voice dripped with contempt. "You are in violation of Hegemony space. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." "Admiral Kexvar," Chen replied calmly. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Fleet. We are here to inspect your biological research facilities and ensure compliance with interstellar warfare conventions." Kexvar's laugh was harsh and grating. "Your ultimatum means nothing here, human. The Hegemony bows to no one. We have 47 warships in this system and more arriving every hour. You have one ship. The mathematics are not in your favor. Admiral, you seem to be under the impression that this is a military engagement. What else would it be?" Chen's expression grew cold. "A demonstration." Before Kexvar could respond, the transmission cut out. Chen turned to her tactical officer. "Lieutenant Rodriguez, are we in position?" "Yes, Captain. All systems are ready. Execute Protocol 7. Zarathek had no idea what Protocol 7 was, but she was about to find out. On the view screen, space around Korthak Prime began to shimmer. It was subtle at first, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. But gradually the shimmer intensified until reality itself seemed to be rippling. "What's happening?" Zarathek asked. "We're introducing a little chaos into their reality," Chen explained. "Turns out, when you understand physics well enough, you can make some very interesting suggestions to the universe about how things should work." As they watched, the Hegemony fleet began to experience problems. Not explosions or weapon strikes. Problems. Ships that had been accelerating suddenly found themselves decelerating. Weapons that should have fired forward discharged backwards. Communication systems began broadcasting each other's transmissions in an endless feedback loop. "This is impossible," came Admiral Kexvar's voice over the chaos. "What are you doing to us?" "Nothing permanent," Chen replied. "We're just adjusting the local physical constants, making some minor edits to how cause and effect work in your immediate vicinity." One of the Hegemony battleships tried to fire its main plasma cannon at the inevitable consequences. The energy beam emerged from the barrel, traveled about halfway to its target, then made a 90-degree turn and headed toward empty space. "You're rewriting physics?" Zarathek whispered in awe. "Only locally," Chen said, "and only temporarily. Think of it as aggressive scientific debate." The demonstration continued for exactly 10 minutes. 10 minutes during which the entire Hegemony fleet found themselves subject to physics that followed human rules rather than universal ones. Gravity fluctuated. Time dilated randomly. Energy behaved in ways that violated every known law of thermodynamics. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything returned to normal. "Admiral Kexvar," Chen broadcast. "That was a minor adjustment. Would you like to see what happens when we make major ones?" The response was immediate. "No, we surrender. What do you want?" "I want you to shut down your bioweapons. Research all of it immediately. It's done. We're shutting it down now. I want all existing samples turned over to our containment teams for destruction." "Of course, whatever you say. And I want a formal apology broadcast to every civilian population that your research program has targeted." There was a long pause. "An apology?" "Admiral, you were developing diseases designed to kill specific species. Children, families, entire civilizations. The very least you can do is apologize for that." Yes, we'll make the broadcast immediately." Chen nodded and cut the transmission. She turned to Zarathek, who was staring at her in shock. "That's it?" Zarathek asked. "You're just going to let them surrender?" "That's the point, Captain. We're not here to conquer anyone or rule the galaxy. We're here to make sure that certain lines don't get crossed. The hegemony crossed one of those lines, so we reminded them why that's a bad idea. But they'll just rebuild their program once you leave." Chen smiled, and this time there was genuine warmth in it. "Will they?" As if, in answer to her question, every screen on the bridge flickered to life with a new transmission. It was being broadcast from Korthak Prime, from what was clearly the hegemony's government center. The figure on screen was Admiral Keksavar, but he looked different, smaller somehow, defeated. "Citizens of the galaxy," he began, his voice hollow. "I am Admiral Keksavar of the Hegemony Fleet Command. I am speaking to formally apologize for our biological weapons research program." He paused, visibly struggling with the words. "We have been developing diseases designed to target specific species. This research was intended to give us military advantages in future conflicts. We now understand that this research was not just strategically unwise, it was morally reprehensible." The camera pulled back to show the destruction of laboratory equipment in the background. "As of this moment, all biological weapons research has been permanently discontinued. All existing samples have been turned over to Terran containment teams for safe destruction. The hegemony formally pledges never to engage in such research again." Keksavar looked directly into the camera, and his next words carried the weight of absolute sincerity. "To the families and civilizations we targeted with our research, we are sorry. There is no excuse for what we plan to do to you. We ask not for forgiveness, but for the chance to prove that we can be better." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge of the inevitable consequences in contemplative silence. "How did you know he would do that?" Zarathek asked. "Because," Chen said, "we did our research too. Admiral Keksavar is a career military officer, but he's not a monster. He got caught up in his government's rhetoric about military necessity and strategic advantages. But when faced with the reality of what his research program would do to innocent beings, well, most people have lines they won't cross. And if he had been a monster," Chen's expression grew serious, "then we would have had a very different conversation. But that's the thing about Deathworlders, Captain. We're very good at identifying monsters, and we're even better at dealing with them." As the inevitable consequences prepared to leave the hegemony system, Zarathek found herself thinking about the implications of what she had witnessed. Humanity hadn't conquered the hegemony. They had convinced them, not through superior firepower, but through superior understanding of consequence and choice. "Captain Chen," she said, as they watched Korthak Prime shrink in the view screen, "can I ask you something personal?" "Shoot." "When your species first developed faster than light travel, why didn't you immediately contact other civilizations? Why the isolation?" Chen was quiet for a long moment. "Because we were afraid." "Afraid? Of us?" "Afraid of what we might have to become." Chen turned to face her. "Captain, humanity spent most of its history fighting itself. We've seen what happens when advanced civilizations meet less advanced ones. We've seen what happens when military technology advances faster than moral development." She gestured toward the stars beyond the view screen. "When we first detected galactic civilization, we made a choice. We decided to watch and learn before making contact. We wanted to understand what kind of galaxy we were joining, and what we learned." She shook her head. "We learned that the galaxy was making the same mistakes we had made, but on a much larger scale. So you stayed hidden." "We stayed hidden, and we prepared. We developed technology that could protect innocence from the horrors we saw being inflicted across the galaxy. We trained fleets that could respond to atrocities without becoming atrocities themselves. And we waited. Waited for what? For the moment when our intervention would save more lives than it cost, when staying hidden would cause more suffering than revealing ourselves." Zarathek thought about her own people dying from bioweapon exposure, about the children aboard her transport who would have died if the humans hadn't intervened. And that moment was when you received our distress call. That moment was when we realized that biological warfare was becoming normalized, that civilizations were developing weapons specifically designed to cause maximum suffering to civilian populations. Chen's voice grew hard. That was the line we couldn't let be crossed. As the inevitable consequences jumped to FTL, carrying them toward their next objective, Zarathek reflected on the strange turn her life had taken. 2 weeks ago, she had been a simple transport captain. Now she was witnessing the birth of a new age, an age where the most dangerous species in the galaxy had decided to become its protectors. "Captain Chen," she said as they entered hyperspace, "what happens next?" "Next, we make sure every civilization in the galaxy understands the new rules. No bioweapons, no targeting of civilians, no exceptions." "And after that?" Chen smiled, and, for the first time since Zarathek had met her, it was a completely peaceful expression. "After that, Captain, we go home. Back to Terra, back to our families, back to our normal lives. Because that's what Deathworlders do. We solve the problem, then we get back to living." But as they traveled through hyperspace toward their next destination, both women knew that the galaxy would never be the same. The Deathworlders had revealed themselves, and they had chosen to be humanity's conscience. Chapter 4. The New Equilibrium. 6 months after the Terran ultimatum, the galaxy was learning to live with its new guardians. Captain Zarathek sat in her quarters aboard the passenger liner Peaceful Journey, reviewing the reports that had been flooding in from across known space. The transformation had been remarkable and in some cases completely unexpected. The war between the crystalline hegemony and the void touched had ended abruptly when both sides realized that their bioweapon stockpiles had become liabilities rather than assets. Without the threat of mutual genetic annihilation hanging over them, they had actually sat down and negotiated. The peace treaty had been signed 3 days ago. The Kethraxi had transformed from one of the galaxy's most feared military powers into an unlikely advocate for peaceful research. Their biotechnology expertise, once used to create weapons, was now being applied to medical breakthroughs that were saving lives across dozens of species. Even the hegemony had undergone a radical transformation. Admiral Kexvar had resigned from his military position and was now heading a new civilian oversight committee ensuring that military research remained within ethical boundaries. But it wasn't just the major powers that had changed. Throughout the galaxy, smaller conflicts were resolving themselves as species realized that their human-monitored neighbors were no longer the existential threats they had once seemed. A soft chime interrupted Zarathek's reading. "Captain Zarathek," came the voice of the ship's communication officer. "You have an incoming transmission from Terra." Zarathek's 4 eyes widened in surprise. In the 6 months since the ultimatum, she had been serving as an unofficial liaison between various civilian governments and the Terran Defense Fleet, but she had never received a direct communication from humanity's homeworld. "Put it through to my quarters." The holographic display activated, revealing a face that Zarathek recognized but had never expected to see in a casual setting. It was Captain Sarah Chen, but she wasn't wearing her military uniform. Instead, she was dressed in simple civilian clothes sitting in what appeared to be a garden. "Captain Zarathek," Chen said with a warm smile. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Not at all, Captain Chen, though I have to admit I'm surprised to hear from you directly. Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine. Better than fine, actually. I'm calling because I wanted to invite you to something." "Invite me?" Chen's smile grew wider. "Terra. I'd like you to visit Terra." Zarathek felt her respiratory systems stutter. "Visit the Death World?" "Visit our home," Chen corrected gently. "Captain, for the past 6 months you've been telling the galaxy that humans aren't the monsters they imagined us to be. You've been helping other species understand that we're just people trying to do the right thing. But I realized something. You've never actually seen what we're protecting." "I don't understand." "Terra isn't just a death world, Captain. It's also one of the most beautiful places in the universe. It's where we learn to be human. And I think you might understand us better if you saw it for yourself." Zarathek was quiet for a long moment. The invitation was unprecedented. To her knowledge, no non-human had ever been invited to visit Terra. The planet was legendary not just for its dangers, but for humanity's fierce protectiveness of it. Are you sure? I mean, wouldn't there be security concerns? Chen laughed, and the sound was surprisingly musical. Captain, you've been aboard our most advanced warships. You've seen our weapons demonstrations. You've been trusted with operational details that most of our own allies don't know. I think we can trust you with our address. Yes. Yes. I would be honored to visit Terra. Excellent. I'm transmitting coordinates and clearance codes. Fair warning, though. The approach can be a little intimidating the first time. More intimidating than watching you rewrite physics? Different kind of intimidating, you'll see. 3 days later, Zarathek found herself aboard a human courier ship approaching the Sol system. Her pilot was Lieutenant Marcus Torres, a young human who had been assigned as her guide. First time to Terra? He asked as they dropped out of hyperspace. First time to any death world, Zarathek admitted. Well, you picked the right one to start with, home sweet home. As Zarathek looked at the tactical display, she began to understand what Captain Chen had meant about the approach being intimidating. The Sol system wasn't just defended, it was fortified on a scale that defied comprehension. Every asteroid had been converted into a sensor platform or weapon emplacement. The gas giants sported rings of orbital facilities that could have housed entire civilizations. And the space around Terra itself. Sweet first light, Zarathek whispered. Is that a Dyson swarm? Partial one, Torres said proudly. We're only using about 15% of Sol's total output. The rest we leave alone. Turns out stars don't like being messed with too much. But it wasn't the impossible technology that took Zarathek's breath away. It was the ships. Thousands of them. Tens of thousands. Vessels ranging from small patrol craft to massive dreadnoughts that dwarfed anything she had seen before. And they were all obviously human, sharing the same angular, aggressive design philosophy as the ships she had encountered. How many ships does humanity have? She asked. Torres shrugged. Depends how you count. Active defense fleet? Couple 100,000, total fleet including reserves and militia? He paused to consider. Honestly, I don't think anyone knows the exact number anymore. We've been building for 2 centuries. 2 centuries of military build-up? 2 centuries of preparing for this moment, Torres corrected. The moment when we would reveal ourselves to the galaxy. We wanted to make sure we were ready for whatever we found out here. As their courier ship approached Terra itself, Zarathek got her first look at the legendary Death World. What she saw challenged everything she thought she knew about planetary classification. Yes, Terra was obviously dangerous. The storm systems visible from orbit were larger and more violent than anything she had seen on other worlds. The ocean coverage was higher than any planet should theoretically be able to sustain. The atmospheric composition would be toxic to most species. But it was also beautiful. The blue of the oceans was unlike anything she had ever seen. The white swirls of cloud formations created patterns that were almost artistic. And the land masses, visible through breaks in the cloud cover, showed a diversity of terrain that spoke of incredible geological activity. It's not what I expected, she admitted. What did you expect? Something more hostile, more obviously dangerous. Torres smiled. Terra's danger isn't obvious from orbit. It's in the details. The gravity that would crush most species. The atmospheric pressure that would implode their lungs. The weather systems that can level continents. The geological activity that reshapes landscapes overnight. He gestured toward the planet below them. But here's the thing. All of that danger is also what makes it so beautiful. The high gravity creates incredible mountain ranges. The atmospheric pressure allows for weather systems that paint the sky in colors you've never seen. The geological activity creates new landscapes constantly. And humanity learned to thrive in all of that. We learned to thrive because of all of that. Terra didn't just make us tough. It made us adaptable. It taught us that the most beautiful things often come with the highest costs. Their ship descended through Terra's atmosphere, and Zarathek got her first direct experience of what Lieutenant A. Torres had been describing. The turbulence was unlike anything she had ever experienced. The ship shook and bucked as it encountered wind shears that would have torn apart most civilian vessels, but Torres seemed completely unconcerned, making minor adjustments to their flight path with the casual expertise of someone who had done this thousands of times. "Sorry about the rough ride," he said as they broke through the cloud layer. "Terra doesn't like to make things easy." What Zarathek saw below her redefined her understanding of beauty. They were flying over a landscape that was simultaneously alien and familiar. Vast forests covered rolling hills, broken by rivers that sparkled like liquid silver in the sunlight. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks covered in white that could only be frozen water. And everywhere, the signs of human habitation, integrated so seamlessly with the natural landscape that it was hard to tell where nature ended and civilization began. "Where are all the cities?" she asked. "What do you mean?" "The massive urban complexes, the industrial zones, the areas stripped bare for resource extraction." Torres looked puzzled. "Why would we do that?" Because that's how civilization works. You extract resources, build cities, modify the environment to suit your needs. Captain Zarathek, Terra is our home. We don't modify it. We work with it. Those forests you see? They're working forests, managed for both ecological health and resource production. Those rivers? They're cleaner now than they were when we first achieved industrialization. Those mountains? They're both wilderness preserves and resource extraction sites designed to minimize environmental impact. As their ship approached the landing coordinates, Zarathek began to understand something fundamental about humanity that she had never grasped before. They weren't conquerors of their world, they were partners with it. The landing site was a small facility nestled in a valley between two mountain ranges. As they touched down, Zarathek could see Captain Chen waiting for them, no longer in military uniform but dressed in simple outdoor clothing. "Welcome to Terra," Chen said as Zarathek descended from the courier ship. The first thing that struck Zarathek was the gravity. It was exactly as advertised, crushing by the standards of most species. But her environmental suit compensated, and after a few moments she found herself adapting to the sensation. The second thing that struck her was the air. Even filtered through her suit's atmospheric processors, she could sense the richness of Terra's atmosphere. It was thick, heavy with moisture and trace compounds that spoke of incredible biological diversity. "How do you want to do this?" Chen asked. "We could start with a formal tour, show you our government centers and military facilities. Or, I could show you why we fight so hard to protect places like this." Chen led her along a path that wound up into the hills surrounding the landing site. As they walked, she began pointing out details that Zarathek would have missed. "See that tree line? That's old-growth forest. Some of those trees are over 1,000 years old. And that stream? It connects to a river system that spans half the continent." They reached a viewpoint that looked out over the valley, and Chen gestured for Zarathek to look more closely. "What do you see?" Zarathek activated her suit's magnification systems and studied the landscape below. What she saw was a complex ecosystem in perfect balance. Animals she couldn't identify moved through the forests. Birds flew in formations that seemed almost choreographed. And everywhere, the signs of human presence that enhanced rather than disrupted the natural systems. "I see harmony," she said finally. "That's exactly right. Terra taught us that survival isn't about dominating your environment. It's about finding your place in it. Every species here, including us, has a role to play in keeping the whole system healthy." Chen sat down on a boulder and looked out over the valley. "This is why we stayed hidden for so long, Captain. This is what we were protecting. Not just our species, but our way of life. Our understanding that strength comes from working with the world around you, not against it." Zarathek sat down beside her, the powered joints of her environmental suit, compensating for Terra's gravity. "And now you're protecting the entire galaxy the same way." "We're trying to. The bioweapons programs we've been shutting down, they represent the opposite of everything Terra taught us. They're attempts to use life itself as a weapon, to turn the fundamental processes of existence into tools of destruction. That's why you react so strongly to them. That's why we can't allow them to exist. Captain, Every species in the galaxy evolved on a world that taught them lessons about survival. Terra taught us that survival means protecting the innocent, working in harmony with your environment and never using life itself as a weapon against others. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun move across Terra's sky. The light was different here, harsher and more intense than Zarathek was used to, but also somehow more alive. "Captain Chen," she said finally, "what happens now? Humanity has revealed itself, ended the age of biological warfare, and essentially appointed itself as the galaxy's moral authority. What's the endgame?" Chen smiled. "The endgame is that we don't need to be the galaxy's moral authority anymore. The goal is to make ourselves obsolete." "How do you mean?" "Right now, civilizations are behaving ethically because they're afraid of us. That's not sustainable long term, and it's not what we want. We want civilizations to behave ethically because they understand why it's the right thing to do." Chen stood up and offered Zarathek a hand up. "That's actually why you're here, Captain. You've become something we never expected when we revealed ourselves." "What's that?" "A translator. You help other species understand what we're trying to accomplish. You explain that we're not conquerors or overlords. We're just people who learned some hard lessons and want to share them." As they walked back toward the landing site, Zarathek found herself thinking about the future. The galaxy was changing, adapting to the new reality of human oversight. But that oversight wouldn't last forever. Eventually, other species would internalize the lessons that Terra had taught humanity. "Captain Chen, can I ask you one more question?" "Of course. What happens if another species develops weapons that are even worse than bioweapons? Something you haven't prepared for?" Chen's expression grew thoughtful. "Then we'll deal with it the same way we dealt with bioweapons. We'll make it clear that some lines can't be crossed, and we'll enforce that boundary until other species understand why it exists." "And if you can't enforce it? If you encounter something beyond your capabilities?" Chen stopped walking and looked directly at Zarathek. "Then we'll ask for help. Captain, humanity isn't trying to be the galaxy's sole guardian forever. We're trying to be its first guardian, long enough for other species to learn how to be guardians themselves." As they reached the landing site, Torres was waiting with the courier ship prepared for departure. "So," Chen said, "what do you think of Terra?" Zarathek looked around at the landscape one more time. The mountains, the forests, the streams, and the sky that had produced the most dangerous and most protective species in the galaxy. "I think," she said carefully, "that I understand why you call it home. And I think the galaxy is very lucky that Terra taught you to protect rather than conquer." As the courier ship lifted off from Terra's surface, carrying Zarathek back to her own part of the galaxy, she carried with her a new understanding of what humanity represented. They weren't just the species from the Death World. They were the species that had learned the Death World's most important lesson, that true strength comes from protecting those who cannot protect themselves. And they were teaching that lesson to the galaxy, one civilization at a time. Epilogue: The Garden of Worlds. 5 years after first contact. Captain Zarathek, now Admiral Zarathek of the newly formed Interspecies Ethics Council, stood on the observation deck of the Harmony's Light, watching the dedication ceremony taking place on the planet below. The world was called New Verdant, and it was the first planet to be jointly terraformed by a coalition of species working together. What made it special wasn't just the cooperation involved in its creation, but what it represented: the galaxy's first attempt to apply Terra's lessons on a planetary scale. The surface of New Verdant was a careful balance of ecosystems from dozens of different worlds. Crystalline formations from the hegemony worlds grew alongside earth trees from human colonies. Void-touched energy gardens provided power, while supporting the bioluminescent forests of the Nexari. And throughout it all, the careful hand of joint stewardship ensured that every species' contributions enhanced rather than competed with the others. "Quite a sight, isn't it?" came a familiar voice. Zarathek turned to see Sarah Chen approaching, still in her Terran Defense Fleet uniform, but wearing the additional insignia that marked her as humanity's representative to the Ethics Council. "It's remarkable," Zarathek agreed. 5 years ago, half the species working on that planet were pointing weapons at each other. And now they're sharing gardening tips, Chen said with amusement. Who would have thought? The ceremony below was reaching its climax. Representatives from 47 different species were taking turns adding soil from their homeworlds to a central garden that would serve as the planet's symbolic heart. It was a small gesture, but it represented something unprecedented in galactic history. Genuine cooperation in the service of creating rather than destroying. Admiral Chen, Zarathek corrected herself. Do you think it will last? The cooperation? Or the peace? Both. Chen was quiet for a moment, watching as a group of former enemies worked together to plant a tree that would grow to represent their shared future. I think it will last because it has to, she said. Finally. The alternative is too terrible to contemplate. That's not very optimistic. Actually, it is. Chen turned to face her. 5 years ago, species cooperated because they were afraid of us. Today, they're cooperating because they've learned what we learned on Terra, that working together creates something better than any of us could build alone. As if to illustrate her point, a transmission came through from the surface. It was Admiral Keksavar, the former hegemony military leader, who had become one of the most vocal advocates for interspecies cooperation. Control, this is the surface. Team, we've completed the primary ecosystem integration. All species' biological contributions are showing positive interaction matrices. New Verdant is officially ready for colonization. The celebration in the Harmony's Lights Observation Lounge was immediate and genuine. Representatives from dozens of species cheered together, celebrating not just the completion of a terraforming project, but the proof that former enemies could become partners in creation. Admiral Zarathek, came another transmission. This one from the bridge. We're receiving a priority communication from the Terran Defense Fleet. Put it through. The holographic display activated to show Admiral Marcus Rivera, looking older but more relaxed than when Zarathek had first seen him during the ultimatum crisis. Admirals Chen and Zarathek, he said with a smile. Congratulations on New Verdant. It's everything we hoped it would be when we started this process. Thank you, Admiral, Chen replied. I take it the Defense Fleet approves? The Defense Fleet is proud, Rivera said. But more importantly, we're optimistic. This is the first world created under the new paradigm, but our projections suggest it won't be the last. How many other joint terraforming projects are in development? Zarathek asked. 17 confirmed, with another 33 in the planning stages. It seems the galaxy has developed a taste for cooperation. As the transmission ended, Zarathek reflected on how much had changed since that first desperate distress call. The galaxy was still dangerous, it always would be, but it was no longer cruel. The age of bioweapons and genocidal warfare had ended not with conquest but with education. Admiral Chen, she said, can I ask you something I've been wondering about for 5 years? Shoot. When humanity first received our distress call, how did you know we weren't just another military engagement? How did you know we represented something worth changing your entire civilization for? Chen was quiet for a long moment, looking out at New Verdant where dozens of species were working together to build something beautiful. Honestly, we didn't. When we first received your call, we just knew that innocent people were dying and we had the power to stop it. Everything else, everything that came after, we figured out as we went along. You revolutionized galactic civilization by accident. We revolutionized galactic civilization by doing what Terra taught us to do, protect those who can't protect themselves and work with our environment instead of against it. The rest was just logistics. As the Harmony's light prepared to depart New Verdant, Zarathek took one last look at the planet that represented the galaxy's new future. It was beautiful, but not in the way Terra was beautiful. Terra's beauty came from the harmony between a dangerous world and the species that had learned to thrive there. New Verdant's beauty came from the harmony between dangerous species that had learned to thrive together. Admiral Chen, she said, as they watched the planet shrink in the view screen. What's next for humanity? Now that the galaxy has learned Terra's lessons, What does the Terran Defense Fleet do? Chen smiled, and it was the most peaceful expression Zarathek had ever seen on a human face. We go home, Admiral. We go back to Terra, back to our families, back to tending our own gardens. We let the galaxy take care of itself for a while. And if something goes wrong, if another crisis arises, then the galaxy calls us, and we come running. But until then, Chen gestured toward the stars that now represented not a collection of potential threats, but a community of civilizations learning to work together. Until then, we trust that we've taught the galaxy how to be its own guardian. As the Harmony's light jumped to hyperspace carrying its mixed crew of species back to their various homeworlds, it left behind more than just a successfully terraformed planet. It left behind proof that the most dangerous species in the galaxy had used their power to create something unprecedented in the history of civilized space. A galaxy where the strong protected the weak not because they were forced to, but because they had learned that was the only way to build something that would last. The Deathworlders had kept their promise. They had finished the fight. And in finishing it, they had taught the galaxy how to live in peace. The end.